I may fizzle out on us today. I got some food poisoning yesterday and was sick until 3:30 this morning and still don't feel very good. I ate one little piece of toast to try to settle my stomach, and I had another piece, but my dog snatched it. Yeah, I had it in here. I was going to bring it with me, and he snatched it. Well, if he did, he deserves it, Ben. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're at the 49th chapter. We've only got two more to go. And we did have a question last week. Jacob does get buried. Did you find it? Oh, okay. In 50, verse 7, so Joseph went up to bury his father. And then 50:12, thus his sons did for him as he had asked, had instructed them, and they carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, the field near Mamre. So he did get buried. It was Joseph who didn't get buried till they carried his bones at the Exodus time. Okay, so we've got all of these poetry verses in 49 that have been gathered up from the tradition and used for this Jacob's farewell. And then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather around that I may tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Assemble and hear, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father." And so he starts with Reuben, the oldest. It says, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the first fruits of my vigor, excelling in rank and excelling in power, but unstable as water. You shall no longer excel, because you went up onto your father's bed, then you defiled it. You went up onto my couch." And that was, I think it was Bilhah, after Rachel died, and so he was. We talked about that before, but anyway. "Then Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. May I never come into their counsel. May I not be joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and at their whim they hamstrung oxen." Meaning, this is the first place we've heard of this. It wasn't in the earlier story about that at Shechem, where they tried to revenge their sister's rape and abduction. "Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Egypt, or in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel." Meaning, they will be absorbed into other tribes. They will not keep their own name. Judah, okay, he's eliminated the top three. Now we come to Judah. "Your brother shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches down. He stretches out like a lion, like a lioness. Who dares rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah." And that's the king's scepter. "Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and the obedience of the peoples is his. So binding his foal to the vine, and the donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washes his garments in wine, and his robe in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. So that sounds weird. So the point of which washing the garments in wine is they have got such an abundance of the produce from the fields that they can just waste all this wine washing clothes. And besides, they might have wanted to have a purple robe, and it would stain it that way. Anyway, that was just my little tidbit. I don't know. The commentators didn't say that. Anyway, Zebulun shall settle at the shore of the sea. He shall be a haven for ships, and his brother shall be at Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, laying down between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to the burden, and became a slave at forced labor. We'll talk about that a little later. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that the rider falls backwards. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. And commentator said that was just slipped in there. Not sure why, exactly what that means. But anyway, then Gad shall be raided by raiders, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall provide royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears lovely fawns. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers fiercely attack him. They shot at him and pressed him hard. Yet his bow remained taut, and his arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, meaning God helped him. By the name of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, by the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father are stronger than the blessings of the eternal mountains. The bounties of the everlasting hills, may they be on the head of Joseph, on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. And Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. Okay, so we've gotten through all of the sons, and those are his kind of blessings. So all of these are the 12 tribes of Israel. Now at this point, they're not the sons of Jacob, but they've just telling us these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, blessing each one of them with a suitable blessing. Then he charged them, saying to them, I am about to gather to my people. Bury me with my ancestors in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave of the field at Machpelah near Mamre, in the land of Canaan, in the field that Abraham brought from Ephron the Hittite as a burial site. Then Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried there. Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were purchased from the Hittites. And when Jacob ended his charge to his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Meaning, he died. After that long speech, he just wore himself out. Well, in her book, The Wrestling with Angels, the Naomi Rosenblatt, who does lots of analysis of Genesis and does her psychology, looking at the dynamics of the family and the parties involved. She calls Jacob's farewell blessing a last testament. And she says the blessing, or his bequest to the sons, if we look at the overall bequest, he is giving them the faith. Now, it doesn't quite sound like it with all that kind of stuff, but if you read it and kind of understand the overall statement, he's giving and pick up the pieces where he refers to God and so forth. That's fundamentally what he's doing. He's passing on the covenant, the relationship with God, who he says has been his shepherd all his life long to this day, and the angel who has redeemed him from all harm. Now, his insistence on being returned to Canaan for burial with his fathers, Abraham and Isaac, this is an attempt to help the next generation remember from where they have come and where they are destined to return. For it's assumed that Jacob is aware that when they move down into Egypt, they're not coming back right away. It's going to be a long time there. So he wants to plant in their memories and in their minds something to keep them remembering their identity. Because it's so easy to lose that identity, to be assimilated into that culture and lose the identity of being God's people. He retells this story of his children's heritage and the legacy of the covenant that he's leaving with them. And then Rosenblatt stresses that it is still a very important family and social event for elders who will soon be dying, maybe not soon next week, but sometime in the next year or so, or three, to make this verbal testament, last testament, of their values, their wisdom that they've gained, a statement of faith. This I believe about God and eternal matters to their children and grandchildren. Now, the young do not have to accept it all, because sometimes within that this I believe, as we've been hearing all of the controversy about the Confederate flag, some of those cherished beliefs are wrong. As much as one might want to lift up the Confederate flag as a symbol of, those Southern values, the main Southern value was slavery, and you can say, well, their independent spirit, well, that was an act of treason to separate from the Union. And so, anyway, as I've been reading about that and reading all the history, what people are claiming that it means today is not the history of what it has meant. But some of those strongly held beliefs, prejudices and bigotry, should be buried with that generation that would be passing on. But other parts of the legacy and the values should not be lost, because nobody's all bad or all good. There's good things there. But what so often happens is a lot of people believe that actions speak louder than words, which is true on a lot of important issues, but there needs to be consistency between the values and the morality that you profess and your actions and the way you live your life. But sometimes people don't ever utter the words of the beliefs. They don't give the reasons why. A lot of times people see behavior, and if you see behavior, you can interpret the intention and be totally wrong. You may not know why someone does what they do. One of the big ones that has been around a long time in traditional family structures is the man has the role of breadwinner, and he may be in a high-stress job with all kinds of high demands on his time to be able to be successful and keep his job and not get fired and not get passed over at promotion time. To his children who don't see him much, they may think that he loves his job. He loves his job more than he loves them because he spends more time at the job and he misses ball games and recitals and things because he's at his job. And so they might interpret that he loves the job more than them, but in his mind, it is his love of family that drives him to work the long hours and to try to succeed and make the money to provide college for them and to provide the nice home for them in a place where, in all those music lessons and dance lessons and swimming lessons and all of those things, in his mind, his intention is to be the provider of all those blessings. But if the kids never hear him explain that, they might not understand that. But it is difficult to change that just from obligation to be a good dad to some of the spiritual disciplines. A lot of times families do not sit down and at budget time of the year when they're saying, we're making our commitment to the church. And I've had members of my church in the past that have told me, and they voiced it, it says, we drive the old car instead of buying a new car every other year because we set what we give to the church a higher priority than having the new car all the time. And so that's a priority and a value decision and act. And then a lot of times parents won't explain to their children, this is our salary and this is what we give to the church. And because we think this is more important than a lot of other things, then that is shared with the children and they can understand that and hopefully say, well, I love the church too. I'm glad to go to camp and vacation Bible school and all of those things. And so they learn to value that and understand the connections. But one of the main reasons that I've developed my style of weaving the deceased's faith story through his or her life story in my funeral sermons is so often it is the case with grandchildren and sometimes the children themselves that they have not known that the foundation of this beloved grandmother, grandfather's loving, generous, caring spirit has come from their faith. There's nobody connecting the dots. They just know that when they come to visit, you know, how gracious and loving and caring and all, and how much they have a good time and all, but they don't know that. And so I try to tell that story and talk about how this has been developing and is nurtured all through this person's life, that they grew up in the church and their family took them to church and they took your parents to the church and they're still at the church, and look at all these people who've come to celebrate their life. This Sunday school class that's brought the food and all of this. This is, all those seeds that are sown a lifetime have brought these fruits of love and compassion back to this person. But then I usually kind of conclude with the statement that their early faith opened their heart to God's indwelling Spirit, and that Spirit helped to make them this loving, caring, wonderful person that we celebrate their life today. Anyway, but this is kind of what's happening in Genesis as well. This telling us a little bit of the faith story of the patriarchs. Now, this is long before a well-refined and developed legal code or moral code. This is before 10 Commandments and Moses on the mountain. And they're learning these ethical questions the hard way. But it does tell the stories, and when we get to chapter 49, Jacob, Israel, is giving his farewell discourse of blessings and, in one sense, almost curses to these sons who have misbehaved, showing his displeasure. But he's predicting in his speech the long-term effects of character and morality on the succeeding generations. And the characters and the success or failure to thrive of the tribe or the clan is kind of cause and effect. He's trying to lay out, or actually the author of the text. But another aspect of this is that it was not written in the times that the patriarchs lived. There was not someone there taking notes on this. As I said, the poetry of the way it's laid out, these were poems and things that had been gathered up that were very old and ancient and woven together in order to present this speech. And this was happening after the Babylonian captivity. So to a great extent, it's all after the fact, and it's explanations of why did some of these tribes succeed and prosper and why others didn't. But it's all about this forming of an alliance and a future that is a part of the real history. A lot of this Jacob and his sons is a way of creating a story and telling a story, bringing historical pieces together and weaving it together so that this federation of folks who are forming Israel and Judah would have a sense of a common bond. We're in this together. This is part of our heritage, and they'd bring each one of their they call it eponymous, the founding father of the tribe. But anyway, since I got kind of sick, I wasn't able to. This started hitting me late yesterday afternoon, and I was, like I said, I was pretty sick till 3:30 this morning. But I'm just going to share with you what Vaughter has said about these and explaining the historical aspect apart from sons of Jacob. He said, it is, first of all, a collection which predated the redactor of Genesis and was gathered to correspond with a literary form that already existed and would continue to exist for centuries to come in the ancient world. And what he's talking about here is that farewell discourse. the purpose of the aged patriarch, father, master, who on his deathbed decrees the fate of his descendants, his sons, his disciples, is classical not only in the Old Testament, but also non-biblical antiquity. Socrates' farewell discourses, the testaments of the 12 patriarchs, which is extra-biblical, and the New Testament book of John 14, where Jesus gives his farewell discourses at the Last Supper. All of those is a lot of those very important passages that we love from Jesus in John. They're a part of the Last Supper dialogue, the last testament that Jesus is giving to the disciples to help them. But anyway, it's a literary form of conveying those messages. The form was set, and it was fairly universal. The additional note that the word of prediction was also a word of determination. If we predict it, we're putting the thought in your head, and it will probably, that self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing, that is a psychological reality. Undoubtedly important for the biblical author here was likewise not unprecedented, since it was generally assumed that a dying man had some vision into the future that was denied to others. I don't know if you've heard about it. You probably have. Those anecdotal stories where someone is near death and they will sense or feel the presence of someone who has already died, who is there at the bedside. Now, there's no way to prove, go in with Ghostbusters or something and suck up that spirit and then take it to a lab and prove that's who it was. But this happens so often that there's something to it. We're not sure exactly what it is, how it works, but there's something very powerful there. But that sense of a future, that there is a extrasensory perception, and that's the idea here, that near death, that there's this extrasensory perception of what the future might hold. Whether that's true or not, it's a part of the culture to think there is something that might be there. Anyway, these it goes on to explain some of these, but then when it picks up, Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather around that I may tell you what is to happen to you in the days to come, and then assemble and listen. And then you, Reuben, my firstborn," and he says, "You were bad, and so I reject you." But it goes on to say, Reuben was a Transjordanian tribe which roamed north of Arnon, parallel with Judah to the west, and which in covenantal times, in the book of Judges, was hardly to be depended upon in any state of the federational emergency. As the tribes and the groups were having to come together to fight some battle, he's saying here, Reuben couldn't be counted on in the historical studies that they had found of the peoples of that time. And as a matter of fact, it seems to have evaporated as a political force early in Israelite history. Here, the decline of the tribe is attributed to the way Reuben acted, as we hear the story in 35:22, going in to spend the night with Bilhah. Anyway, so we have that. Then we pick up on Simeon and Levi, the brothers who who got revenge for Dinah, their sister. Weapons of violence and their knives, let not my soul enter their counsel, or my spirit be joined to their company, and so forth. I will scatter them in Jacob, disperse them throughout Israel. Now, this history of the Levi and Simeon tribes and peoples, he says in Deuteronomy 33, 8 through 11, Levi is lavishly praised for his true believer response to Moses' call to action, according to the story in Exodus. Simeon is not mentioned there at all, and neither tribe shows up in the roll called in Judges 5. But here it's brought to mind the landlessness of both tribes, their scattering, being assimilated into other tribes. They don't maintain their unique identity. And then the scattering of the peoples was historical. I mean, this is what was happening to these tribes and groups. But it was also consequent on different circumstances than what is being presented in Genesis. But anyway, the problem when they went in and killed all the people at Shechem was the story that we're hearing about, and that's the point of the knives, where they were slaughtering people. Anyway, but Simeon was originally a people which inhabited the southern reaches of Judah and was eventually absorbed into it. However, they were probably never of great consequence in the Israelite League, since they're just an appendage of Judah. Now, Levi was likewise probably a latecomer into Israel, a fact which may explain its landlessness. By the time this group of people arrived, everybody had staked out all their territories. And it's debated whether there was ever a tribe of Levi in the sense of the other tribes who ever had a distinct territory of its own. The Levitical cities of Numbers 35, 2 through 8, and Joshua 21 are rightly judged by modern scholars to have been the ideal rather than a real possession of Levites. But it is far likelier that the Levi was originally a social class rather than a geographically determined people, a nomadic caste like the itinerant Smiths or the Rechabites or the Kenites. Anyway, they traveled around, sort of like gypsies. They didn't ever own a territory. And they didn't adapt well to the settled ways of the rest of Israel. And therefore, they just got dispersed and assimilated. But now later we have the Levites frequently appear along with widows and orphans and resident aliens as a marginal and deprived people who need alms for the poor and so forth. But then later, Levi obtained a fresh and unique standing in the society of Israel by being assigned the functions of a professional priesthood. As you may remember, in Jesus' time, the Levi and so forth. But anyway, the process by which this transformation took place is unknown to us. So the animosity shown towards Simeon and Levi in these verses make them stand out in contrast to the treatment meted out to the other tribes, even to Reuben. So it goes on. Now, the next group of verses picks up, it says, you, Judah. See, we've eliminated Reuben, Levi, and Simeon, the first three, and now we're down to Judah, who takes over a major role. You, Judah, shall your brothers praise, your hand on the neck of your enemies. The sons of your father shall bow down to you, Judah like a lion's whelp, and equating Judah to the strength and terror of lions. And he will prosper and wash his clothes in wine, and so forth. The tribe of Judah came into preeminence with the coming of the monarchy under David. And this fragment of poetry doubtless dates to that time, in the opinion of many scholars. Now see, if it's at the time of David that this poetry was written, and then it ends up in Genesis, I mean, this is not written at the time of the patriarchs. This isn't a quote from Jacob himself. But it's, as again, this evidence for what we say, that this was a federation and this was composed in order to try to weave their identity together as one people instead of separate tribes. Anyway, Judah had never been a part of Israel until the monarchy or shortly before it. In Judges 5, there's no mention of Judah, and from Deuteronomy 33:7, it may be plausibly conjectured that Judah was then in a tentative state of rapprochement with the Israelite League, striving to overcome geographical and political barriers that stood in its way. So Judah was looked upon as an aggressor coming in and trying to mess up what we've got, and then evidently Judah succeeds and takes over. But anyway. But here in Genesis, of course, the Judahite priority among the sons of Israel is ascribed to it by default after passing over Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. And then it moves on to the tribes of Joseph and elevating Joseph very high later on. Let's see. So later still, a people conscious of having been touched by the liberating power of God would find it natural to call the agent of their salvation by the name of Son of David. So Judah had Davidic king, and then when they got to thinking of messianic hopes and deliverance, then they would look back to this time of great glory and power and success and look for a new deliverer to come out of that tribe and restore what had been lost. And so this connection with Son of David that we pick up on in the New Testament. So in verse 9, Judah is likened to a lion. The imagery may be thought self-explaining since it occurs elsewhere. But anyway, it's not particularly Judahite. It's not tied to that. Lots of places we see statues of lions connected with trying to symbolize the power and the fierceness of the rulers and the leaders. There's archaeological evidence that the lion was a divine symbol in Judah long before the rise of Israel. So now for Zebulun and Issachar and Dan, and the story about those tribes and what's going on with them. Nothing is very remarkable about Zebulun, even if we accept some suggestions. But anyway, we have a little poetic anthropology. It says, "The you, Judah, shall your brothers praise," is Yehuda, anyway, in Hebrew, and it is the Issachar, Harma, and Dan, Yadan of all of these different words. But we are being told, apparently, by the poet whose reach for the facts far exceeded the grasp of which he was capable in central Palestine. In other words, he's assigning these people to territories that they didn't have, and that the territory of Zebulun bordered the Mediterranean Sea, was contiguous with Phoenicia, and drew its wealth and nautical commerce. None of these assumptions seems to have been correct. It wasn't really by the sea. It wasn't really a nautical group. All the Israelites are landlubbers. They're not seafaring people. They didn't develop those skills. So Zebulun was an inland people sandwiched between Asher and Issachar, westward of the Sea of Galilee in northern Palestine. But anyway, we do know that Zebulun rallied to the Israelite banner as a sturdy ally in the formative age that determined the destiny of a land and a people, Israel. Then Issachar, which inhabited the northern bank of the fertile Jordan Valley, comes in for a separate kind of mention. And so here Issachar is caricatured as a docile and overladen beast of burden, submitted to domestication with all its assurance of fodder and security in preference to the uncertainties and risks that are inevitably attached to freedom, a free life. See, the Issachar is a raw-boned ass crouching between the saddlebags. Crouching between saddlebags means he's burdened down. He's carrying things. When he saw how good a settled life was and how pleasant the country, he bent his shoulder to the burden and became a toiling serf, or became a slave. So what that is telling us is that Issachar, that tribe, is folks who decided to work for somebody else, not be entrepreneurs and create their own way of living, that they submitted to a master and demeaning existence for Israelite tribe. Issachar is intent to live in harmony with Canaanite overlords, to work for them and make with them a common future. With this condition of Issachar was before or after the battle of Tanakh, we do not know. But in the moment of decision, Issachar cast its lot with Israel. So they became one of the tribes, and gets to be named a son of Jacob, because they did join this allegiance. Dan shall achieve justice for his kindred, both in legend and in fact. The Danites seem to have been a people of southern Palestine who migrated north, and the companion of Dan with the horned viper by the path seems to be just saying his style is that he would do, as a small tribe, they would do sneak attacks. They're almost like, the stories of the American patriots who were fighting the British. The British would march around in all their uniforms, and then the patriots would sneak around and shoot at them from behind the rocks, and more like a sniper or an underground kind of attack. So they were that kind of a people, and they were very valuable in the battles, because they would attack the flank and wouldn't be a part of the massive army that would meet head on, but they had some strategic ways of helping. Gad shall be raided by raiders, but he shall raid at their heels. And Asher's produce is rich, and he shall furnish dainties for the kings. And Naphtali is a hind let loose, which brings forth lovely fawns. So there's not much about these. Gad was a Transjordan tribe, and it dwelt in the midst of nomadic peoples for whom Raziah was a way of life, and I don't know what that means, but anyway, I guess raiding was a way of life. They were like in the Wild West, the gangs who would hold up the stagecoach that we see on the old Western movies. Anyway, but they had a fierceness and were warlike kind of people. Now, the geography of Asher and Naphtali and their consequent prosperity is called to attention. Asher was indeed a maritime tribe, but it did not possess ports, and it was vaguely in this territory. But none of the Israelite people were really seafarers. They had property at a port, and they did commerce with the seafarers, but they did not own ships and sail about. And then we get over to Joseph and all of his things, but then we'll skip him and we'll get to Benjamin. Is a ravenous wolf. Mornings he devours the prey, and evenings he is distributing the spoils. So Benjamin was a very small but important tribe in the Israelite Federation, and he paid his dues in the great battle of Tanakh. And it's from him, from Benjamin tribe, that the king Saul came out of that tribe, the first leader of the Federation who resembled a king. And the secret success before is eventually overwhelmed by history in the shape of David's charisma and rebirth of the Ephraimite nationalism. So anyway, Benjamin has some influence there. But kind of to sum all of this up, it's become quite evident by now that there can be considerable discrepancy between the sons of Israel and Jacob, or Jacob, as they are listed in the genealogies of Genesis, the 12 sons of one man named Jacob, and as they actually figured in history, even the history presupposed by Genesis 49, this disparate peoples separated by time and tradition and geography, who came together through a complex of circumstances only vaguely hinted at in Genesis, in order for them at a later time to be the source of this nation, Israel. So if it has done nothing else, the poetry of this chapter has served to remind us of the great gulf that divides textbook history from the history that Richard Niebuhr called internal. That is, the history which a people creates for itself and in which it discovers its identity and its purpose, which have to be something one creates and chooses. If we just kind of float along passively, letting the events of history dictate and rule who we are, and we just roll with it, it's different from somebody who has the sense of manifest destiny, a sense of purpose that we need to strive for. I remember reading a book comparing Custer and Crazy Horse when they had the battle of, and the book talked about how these two warriors went through their life and how they eventually ended up in the battle of the Little Bighorn. And it was quite disturbing to me as I read that the Western movement in America not only the mentality, not only were Native Americans, the Indians, looked at as an obstacle to be conquered and to be eliminated, but the thick forests were looked at the same way. And the whole idea was just to go in there and chop down all those trees and clear the land and get rid of them. The trees were seen as the enemy to be conquered. And then we get to the West Coast eventually. Look what happened to the giant redwoods. They just about eliminated them all. Cut down one tree and you can build a town. But the attitude of the Spirit that things that are in your way become enemy to be destroyed. And that was quite disturbing to sense how so much of that is still. I mean, when I was taking Oklahoma history, we learned about folks moving west would use up a farm, work it, plant, and they wouldn't do anything to renew the soil. They just move on, clear and create new farmland and just leave instead of taking care of what we had. But to actually look at the trees as an alien force to be conquered and destroyed, that was crazy. When we look at the rich beauty of the wood and how it can be used artistically and sanded and stained and finished and have the color and the uniqueness of it just pop out at us and be beautiful, but they weren't doing that. They're just cutting them down and burning them, or chopping them up and making roads. They'd cut trees and make wooden planks to be the road someplace. Anybody ridden on a wooden plank road? Well, anyway, we've got chapter 50 to get through, where we're going to bury Jacob and then have Joseph's death, and we'll deal with that next week. Any questions on what we've covered so far?
Who is your author and book here?
Oh, this is Bruce Vawter, Vawter, and it's on Genesis. A New Reading is the title.
It sounds like to me, kind of extrapolating from what he's saying, what you've been drawing on there, that he would say there's no verifiable bloodlines, traceable bloodlines between these different clans and the original sons of Jacob, that perhaps, and maybe they didn't even use the names of the sons at the time that they existed, that's been accorded them later on by...
Yeah, and we've got different sons. It's sort of like we've got different lists of Jesus' disciples in places, that there is some historical connection, but the Bible is not a history book using the methods of all of our scientific research and data, and particularly if we go into the carbon dating and the genetic traces of who's related to whom. There are connections in these old stories as we've been going through. So many of the stories we see ancient parts to them that they've brought into this story that they're trying to tell about the patriarchs. But basically, this people coming together had a common and relatable lifestyle, value system, and as we learn about Jacob going off to Laban to get a wife, that there were interactions and connections between these peoples. So they may have had some genetic and actual bloodline things, but all of that's lost to us. But the main part is these people were able to come to understanding and develop the concept of God differently than the neighbors. And that different ones of these people had these encounters with God that gave them this sense of calling and purpose. Whether all the details and all the other connections are historical or not, we trust that those epiphanies and those contacts with this God who seems to be helping them. I don't know, I need to look it up. There was one interesting theory about how these people came together. The main defining moment for the children of Israel and their God is to understand that their God is the God who frees slaves. So the Exodus is the watershed. And so everything up to Exodus is kind of, where did we come from, and then how did we get down there? And then afterwards, but one theory about that was that there was some slaves down in Egypt, and somehow they had a rebellion and they got loose. And as they moved across Palestine, they created a big stir, and lots of other people who felt suppressed started joining them. They would just walk away from their slavery as well and join these people. And so as they're doing that, then they, form this army and they take Canaan. They take over Canaan. That's why we have all the blood and war and stuff when we get, after, Moses and 40 days in the wilderness, get strong, and then they go and have the battles and conquer Canaan. And they just have a sense that in the midst of all of this God is with them and helping them.
Regional allocation of lands to the tribes and things like that, you think those are mostly figments of writer's imaginations later?
Well, no, those were actually where they were. They were taking historical, that's the historical part. They lived in those places.
So whether it was actually allocated?
No, correct. Yeah, no, they didn't just go over there and have a big meeting and get a map and throw darts or something to decide who gets where. These were the historical movements of peoples that move in and out and around, and we've got, through history, able to find and identify a lot of those kinds of things with archaeology and digging up stuff and looking at it and carbon dating it and finding things written, naming things. Sort of like some of the old documents have names that look like these biblical characters, but it's just in some of the records of who bought and sold and owned something. It isn't the whole story, but these were historical people that we know that, but the story And as we see the differences between the Yahwist and the Elohist and the priestly version, are different. They go all kinds of different places, and so they're being used differently at different times, and then they take them in order to try to make one story that we can all identify with, because there will be some way of connecting. Anyway, well, I survived. I made it through. For those who came in late, I had food poisoning yesterday, and I was terribly sick until 3:30 this morning, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to make it all the way through, but I did. Somebody must have been praying for me. Anyway, let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for the biblical scholars who try to sort things out, and they do years and years of research and help us better understand what these stories are trying to tell us. We are grateful for the heritage that is passed on from one generation to another, where the elders will say, this is what I've learned, this is what I believe, and the big part of what they convey is their faith in you. So let us continue to keep that faith alive and to pass it on from one generation to the next. And hopefully, in the future, we will get better at being faithful to your call upon our lives. In Christ's name, amen.